Hi everybody, how are you doing? I hope you're well and your studies are going smoothly. And I hope you're also ready to fully apply yourself to today's video because the focus today is the skill of application. I'm going to focus particularly on paper 1 today. I'm going to go through some questions and talk to you about how I do application questions, the sort of principles that I think are important for effective application. And paper 2 I'll probably have another video on another time. So let's crack on. So before we delve into some questions, it's probably worth just making sure we're all happy with what we mean by application. So you all know that you've got AO1 is knowledge, AO2 is application, AO3 is evaluation, discussion, etc. But in terms of your application, it's not something you can just learn from the textbook, is it? That's your knowledge. That's stuff you can just sort of recite, you can explain, you can learn keywords, key definitions, outlines of theories. Here, you need to use that knowledge to actually explain, to interpret, to analyse, well, scenarios you get given, right? New situations, stuff that isn't in the book. AQA are basically saying the same thing here. It's about applying your knowledge and understanding of ideas, theories, processes, techniques, all of this stuff in a theoretical and practical context, but also it's the data handling stuff, yeah? It's your mathsy stuff, it's your stats testing, all that sort of stuff as well can count as AO2, all right? So we're going to largely focus on the application of knowledge in a sort of written sense today, though. We will look at a little bit of research methods at the end. So how do I write it? So some key ideas. I've come up with some principles here. This does sound a bit maybe OTT, but I am doing it tongue in cheek, okay? So I would advise that you signpost your application. You make it really clear in the same way that you do with your evaluation by using evaluative language and sort of lead-in phrases like one strength of, one limitation, that sort of stuff. Similar thing with application, using phrases like, this is seen in the scenario when, or this applies to, the person, situation, whatever it is, using the names that you're given, use some quotes from the STEM, that sort of stuff. Just make it really easy for the examiner to go, do you know what, this candidate is doing application now, so I'm going to credit application, yeah? Okay, I would also say that it's worth going slightly beyond what's just in the STEM, so beyond the quote, and you're actually explaining how your knowledge links to that quote using some reasoning, maybe going a little bit beyond and sort of saying, well, presumably this is what's going on here, and perhaps the person was doing it because, yeah? So a little bit of reasoning, a little bit of inference. I would also say it's really important to make sure that your application is accurate. That might sound silly, but you can write some really well-written stuff that uses the names in the STEM, uses quotes, but unless you've actually selected the right knowledge for that situation, then you're not going to get application marks. My last point is to make sure it's practical. So where you are designing a study, where you're doing some sort of suggestion, maybe you're advising somebody, you're using practical suggestions that are, appropriate for the situation. Linked with this, I would also say you're giving practical examples where possible from the STEM. And that links into the idea of the reasoning as well, because it might be that you have to sort of suggest some examples if there isn't an appropriate quote in there. Okay, so those are my 4 things. You're going to make it clear, you're going to use reasoning, it's going to be accurate, and it's going to be practical. If they made a mnemonic or something, that would be great. If you can think of a way of remembering this, maybe pop it down in the comments. Okay, so here's a question, and we're going to start off by looking at something from social influence. It's going to be about resistance. Remember that resistance, there are 2 explanations for resistance named on the specification that you must know. That is locus of control and its social support. If you want to make this a bit more interactive, you can pause the video at this point, you can do a plan, you can have a go at the question if you like, and then you can hit play again and come back and listen to me talking about it and see my response. So there's your chance to do that. And we're going again. Okay, so there's your question. Now, this is what I've written. So one explanation for resistance is social support, which is the idea that disobedience is more likely in the presence of other people who are disobedient. So straight away I'm thinking about the fact that this is an obedience thing because it's about manager and workers. So I'm not really going to talk about conformity. It's not really relevant. I've selected the knowledge accurately there. Okay, these defiant individuals act as role models, meaning that one person who chose not to complete the training properly may have given others the confidence to do the same. So what I'm doing there is explaining the theory, but I'm doing it in the context of workers and doing the training. Social support is associated with the idea of diffusion of responsibility. Again, there's some key sort of knowledge there, a bit of terminology. The more people disobey, the less severe the consequences will be for an individual. Here, the workers may have thought that if several of them were on their phones rather than training, so I'm using that example from the STEM there, Then the manager would punish them less severely and may just make them do the training the next day. So that's me sort of reasoning and going a little bit beyond what's in the STEM there. So, it doesn't say anything about having to do the training the next day, but it makes sense in that context, doesn't it? Just to sort of elaborate on what I'm talking about a bit, okay? Here's your next one. This is from attachment, and it's about the behaviour of secure and resistant attached children. You might like to have a quick go and then play again when you're ready for me to talk about it. And there goes your chance to do that. Right, so we know that secure and resistant are going to be different in terms of their behaviour. Maybe you have recalled that you might be talking about things like exploration behaviour, reunion behaviour, stranger and separation anxiety, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so let's go through. We've got Hamish and we've got Willow. They're about the same age. It's not really important, to be honest, for this scenario. They've gone to a soft play centre. That's the situation. And they're trying to sort of go and play, or their parents want them to go and play with the other kids. So what's going to happen? Well, here's my response. As a securely attached child, Willow is likely to display secure base exploration behaviour and stranger anxiety. This means, so I'm straight in there with the knowledge, now I'm going to apply it. This means that Willow should happily explore the play equipment, occasionally coming back or looking back at her parents at the table, using them as a base. So I'm explaining my knowledge, but I'm putting it in the context of the scenario. So not just saying using her parents as a secure base, talking about where they are. It says in the STEM that they're settled at a table, so I've used that in my application. However, if approached by another parent or staff member at soft play, again I'm giving suggestions that are appropriate to the context there, she may begin to cry. There you go, that's the stranger anxiety. Let's look at Hamish. In contrast, Hamish is likely to be clingy and have extreme stranger anxiety. So there's my knowledge. Hamish will probably stay sat at the table and may need his parents to take him into the play areas and stay with him to begin with. So again, it's practical, it's appropriate to the context. If approached by a stranger, he'll likely show high levels of distress and be difficult to comfort. Yeah, so it's packed with knowledge, but it's all threaded into that situation, that context. Okay, so it's effective application. Here's your next one. So this is about phobias. It's about using systematic desensitization to treat a giraffe phobia. I don't know what the proper word is for that. If you know, let me know. Maybe I'll look it up. Anyway, there's your chance. If you want to pause it, give it a go. And we're off. Okay, so you need to recall that systematic desensitization is about doing things gradually. So we're going to be coming up with like a hierarchy that will probably start with maybe pictures or cartoons, building up to something a little bit more serious, and maybe even ending with actual exposure to the phobic stimulus. But I'll come back to that. Here's my response. Systematic desensitization is about gradual exposure to a phobic stimulus. To begin with, the therapist would teach Robert relaxation techniques, such as deep breathing, which he can use when he encounters giraffes during the therapy. So I'm talking about how it's going to start. That's my knowledge there, talking about teaching them breathing techniques. But it's in that context again. I'm talking about Robert. I'm talking about giraffes. Okay, let's carry on. The therapist would work with Robert to produce a fear hierarchy, a list of giraffe situations ranked from least to most fearful. This may start with a picture of a cartoon giraffe, for example, then a photo of a real giraffe, stroking giraffe pattern material, and perhaps a virtual reality giraffe encounter, as a real one would be difficult practically. Now, maybe I'm going a bit OTT there to really convince the examiner that I know what I'm doing, but they are appropriate practical suggestions. I'm telling the examiner I know that it would be probably a little bit silly to suggest that you get a giraffe into the therapy office, yeah? Robert would use the techniques to relax at each stage, only moving on when completely calm, in order to remove the fear association with giraffes. Okay, so again, the knowledge is all there, it's accurate, there's some specialist terminology, and I've made appropriate practical links all the way through. Okay, if you had a go, I hope that was good for you. Just a reminder that I have a Research Methods practice questions book with suggested answers all written by me available on Amazon now. Links in the description. That was less than 10 seconds. Let's go. Okay, and the last one we're going to look at today is a memory type question, but it's a research method sort of data analysis type question. So the context here, you've got a study that's being done, you're reading out some words, and we're seeing basically how many can adults remember versus how many children can remember. You've got means there, you've got standard deviations there. Remember that the mean is a measure of central tendency, it's your average, and the standard deviation is a measure of dispersion. It tells you how dispersed, how varied, how spread out the data is on average away from the mean, basically. So if you want to pause it, either just to read it and digest it and think about it, or you want to have a go at it, there is your chance. And let's go. So, just looking at the table, you can hopefully see that the mean is higher for adults, which means on average, adults record more words. So that's what I'm going to start off by talking about. So I'm saying adults record a greater mean number of words than children, suggesting that adults are able to remember slightly more information and so have a greater STM capacity than children do. All right, that's the first half of the response. Standard deviation, I'd probably go slightly further than I need to here. Maybe the last sentence I've got here you don't really need. I'm just showing that sort of reasoning going on there. But let's have a think. So, however, the standard deviation is far higher for adults, showing more variance in their scores, whereas the children's scores are quite consistent. So that's all right. I'm commenting on what the higher standard deviation shows. So the bigger the number, the more spread out the data is. Yeah? I'm going to go a little bit further than that now to get that fourth mark. So this suggests that the overall trend isn't true for all. Some adults had relatively low capacity and some had relatively high. So I could probably stop there. Another way of sort of wording this, you might be familiar with the phrase or the term individual differences. Basically, if you've got a high standard deviation, that shows you or that suggests to you that there are individual differences. Not everybody scored the same. Okay? Now, the last sentence is me going a bit further and sort of suggesting why that might have happened. Like I said, you don't really have to put this last bit. So perhaps these adults have developed strategies for memorizing, such as chunking or visualizing. I just thought I would throw that in for you to think about. So there you go. If you had a go, I hope it went well. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this video on Paper 1 application skills. I hope that was useful for you. I hope if you had a go at the questions, then they went well. Thanks very much for listening and for engaging with it. Let me know if you've got any comments or questions down below. Remember, you've got links in the description if you want to buy my research methods book or word search book. A comment, a like, a subscribe would go a long way to supporting the channel. Thanks very much. I wish you a very good day and good luck with your studies, and I'll see you again in another video.